welcome, Kachaber. Hope everybody's staying safe and healthy during these extraordinary times. Welcome to part 2 in our wonderful 2-part series on Don Quixote and the Talmud. For those who don't know me, my name is Ethan Marcus. I'm the Director of Communications for the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America, the national umbrella organization for the Ladino-speaking Sephardic communities in the United States. We're excited to have you here through our brand new Sephardic Digital Academy, a host of wonderful programs we do on Sephardic history, culture, Ladino language, and of course, Torah and intellectualism, as we have here tonight with our dear friend, Rabbi Aaron Haleva. Just a quick note, as many of you have been asking recently, we record all our programs. So if you have to leave early, hopefully not, or let's say if you miss a piece or two, would like to share with our friends, go check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sephardic Brotherhood, and you can find all the videos from our previous classes there. Just a few notes on our dear guest tonight, Rabbi Haleva. He was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and his entire family is members of Sephardic Bikol Holim, the Sephardic congregation from Turkey, primarily from Tekirdağ and Marmara, who came into the early 20th century. He graduated from Columbia University in 1982 with a degree in mathematics, and from Fordham Law School in 1986. He also attended the University of Washington, where he studied electrical engineering, graduating with a BSEE in 1996, and an MSEE in 1998. He was a long-term personal student of Chacham Professor Jose Faor de Feliz Memoria and received Semicha from the Chacham in 1983. He's a patent attorney at Patterson Sheridan's New Jersey office and has been teaching classes in Talmud and rabbinics in the Andalusian tradition, as well as various works of Maimonides in the Sephardic communities of Seattle, New York, and New Jersey since 1993. Without further ado, Rabbi Haleva, whenever you are ready.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see people from Seattle. Bienvenidos. Chodesh Tov U'Mborach. It is the Rosh Chodesh of Shevat, which means Fruticas is on the way. So let me just do a quick review of some of what we did last week. Oh, and I have to do the famous share screen. Let's see. Okay, here we go. New share, and here we go. Okay, can everybody see the handout there?
Yep, we can hear you and we can see it.
Excellent. Okay, now let me just go a page at a time. Nope. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So this class is the second part in a two-parter about a famous sugya. Sugya is the unit of Talmud, the literary unit. So not like a chapter kind of, or like a piska or a sidra in the Chumash. And this sugya is called Kanya de Rava, El Caño de Rava, the cane of Rava, and with the Pirush, with the commentary of Don Quixote de la Mancha. I'll go over it again at the end of this class, but this word is code. You have to be a member of a select audience in Spain in order to understand exactly what he's saying. So let's take a quick review of this sugya. This is a famous story. It also appears in non-Jewish sources. It appears in the Talmud in Masechet Nedarim to justify why we have a little disclaimer when we administer a biblical oath in rabbinic court or Jewish court to a litigant who is required to take an oath. Because people can manipulate the semantics or the meaning of words and use cute, very sharp words to say one thing, but we who hear it think it means something else. And here's an example of that. This is Kanya de Rava, which means in Aramaic, the cane of Rava. De'ahu Gavra, there was somebody, Dehava Masik Behabre Zuze, that he claimed against his friend money. In other words, I lent you some money, you never paid me. He came in front of Rava. Now, who is Rava? Rava is one of the most prolific Emoraim, or you could say Hachamim of the Talmud, who lived ever, but he lived in the 4th generation of Emoraim, 4th generation of Talmudic Hachamim in a city in Babylonia called Pumbedita. Some people call it Pumbedita. It's Pumbedita, which means the mouth at the delta, because there was a river delta near there, and it was a very important commercial city, etc. He was the Rosh Yeshiva. He was the Rosh Yeshiva after Abaye. You may have heard of Abaye. He's a famous Bar Piluchta, which means fellow arguer. They argued on many issues of Jewish law throughout their lives. And he was the Rosh Yeshiva after Abaye. Now, he was also instrumental in organizing the Sugyot as we have them. So he's a Jewish judge in the Jewish court of Pumbedita, and two litigants come in front of him. One, a lender claiming some money, and another, a borrower. So Rabbah tells the borrower, the lender tells the borrower, Zil pera'li, I lent you money, pay me. Amarle, now the printed text says right here, pera'aticha, but the manuscripts that we do have say pera'ateh, and this is more correct, and I'll tell you why. When you're in court, you don't really speak to each other, you speak to the court. So you wouldn't really respond to a claim, he owes me money, by saying, I paid you. He would say to the court, I paid him. And this is echoed by what the judge now says. Amar le Rabba. So the judge responded, Imken, if that's the case, Zil ishteba, go and swear, means take an oath, le, to him, de pirateh, that you paid him. Azal ve'aite kanya. So the lender went and brought a cane. Now the printed text says v'yahib, and then he put. But that's not correct, because the cane was already fashioned with the hole inside in which were secreted the 10 golden coins. So the real girsa is, and this is in the manuscripts again, kanya v'yahab hanahu zuzeh begaveh, in which he had placed the zuzim, the gold coins in question that he's being claimed for, begaveh, inside it. Behava mistemich be'azil be'ata'aleh le'vedina. Now this borrower is apparently an older gentleman, so he can get away with like walking with a cane. So mistamich be'azil means leaning and going. So you would lean on the cane, take a step, stop, lean on the cane some more, take another step, and kind of make a show of how you're a bit of a cripple in order, of course, to garner sympathy. So he comes to the Beit Din. Amar leh lamalveh. He tells the plaintiff, who's the lender, Nekot hai kanya biyadach. Take this cane in your hand. Nasab sefer Torah v'ishteba. And then the borrower took a sefer Torah and swore the par'eh, that he, I'll translate in a moment, par'eh kol ma dehavaleh biyadeh. So there's two, let me just read the last. So he swore that he par'eh, it's a kind of paying, everything that he had, biyadeh, in his hand. Question, who does his refer to? The plaintiff or the defendant? We'll see in a moment. Ahu malved, the plaintiff, the lender, rahaz. When he heard that, he got angry. And he smashed the cane that the borrower was leaning on, which the borrower had handed to the lender prior to taking the oath with the Sefer Torah. And lo and behold, when the angry lender smashes the cane, the hidden gold coins fall on the floor, and it was made known that he actually swore truthfully, although when he said the words, we thought he meant one thing, and he meant another. Now here's how that works. This turns on the following verb. Pe resh ayin is the shoresh, de par'eh, that he paid him, or that he placed in his hand, kol ma dehavaleh, everything he had of his, everything the borrower had of his, biyadeh, in his hand, in the hand of the lender. So this word de par'eh can mean to pay. And that's what most of the commentators thought, and they're a little confused because payment in Jewish law requires you to notify the payee that you're paying. You just can't drop a bucket full of gold coins on his back door. or his doorstep, you have to say, oh, here, I'm paying you the money I owe you. But par'eh can also mean to place in somebody's hand. And that's what he meant when he said de par'eh. So at the moment he said that, he had already given the cane to the lender. So the lender is holding the cane, and in his hand is, of course, the 10 gold coins that are secreted away in the cane. He just doesn't know it. But it's a truthful statement when you say, I placed in his hand de par'eh biyadeh kolma de havaleh, everything that I had of his. So because the lender got so furious hearing what he knew was a blatant lie, he gets angry, he smashes the cane, and lo and behold, it turns out that he was in fact holding the 10 gold coins, albeit secreted away in a interior volume of the cane while this oath was being taken. Okay, now as I pointed out last week, there's a problem with this. You would never swear on a Sefer Torah in this instance. Why is that? This is what's known as kofer bakol. So in Jewish law, there are different rules on in monetary cases, depending on what the claim and counterclaim are. So if the claim is somebody owes me, let's say, 10 gold coins, and the borrower says, no, I only owe you 3, or I only owe you 5. The loan was for 5. You forgot. If you admit part of the claim, then by biblical law, you have to swear, and then you go free. But by a biblical oath, you have to hold the Sefer Torah. In a rabbinic oath, you do not. Now, the biblical laws of swearing only apply if you admit in part to the claim. If you deny totally the claim, so if the lender says, you owe me 10 gold coins, and you say, I already paid you, I don't owe you anything, I owe you 0, that's called kofer bakol, and you do not take a biblical oath, and you would never swear holding a Sefer Torah. This is a rabbinic oath patterned on the biblical one, but it's not the same, and it's called shiboat hesed. So there's something wrong with this story because the borrower denied everything. He denied he owed him anything, and still somehow he's taking a Sefer Torah, and while the borrower is swearing, holding the Sefer Torah, somehow the lender is holding the cane with the secreted coins. Okay, now let's read the same story in Quixote. So I'm going to read it first in English version, and then we'll read a bit of the Spanish version, and we'll see how it goes. So this is book 2. Don Quixote was written in 2 books, book 1, book 2, by the famous Miguel de Cervantes, who I think, and this class should make pretty clear, we think he was a Judeo, 100%. So now, this story is, now, so what's Quixote, or the way it was pronounced in its day, Quixote? How is it, what's the story of Quixote? So there's this fellow named Don Quixote, and he's a little crazy. And he lives in the 16th century, but he read all kind of books from, let's say, the 13th century, when knights and squires and pages and fancy horses were all over the countryside, and you would engage in jousting and save damsels in distress and so on. So he reads so many of these books that he starts to live in a mental fantasy world. And he thinks his little country of Spain, podunk Spain, is scenes full of knights and enemies of knights and damsels in distress. And in fact, he finds a discarded barber's helmet and barber's bowl, I mean, like a basin, because they didn't have indoor plumbing. So when the barber shaves you, he has to have a basin with water, and he keeps dipping the razor into the water. He thought that was a knight's helmet. And you may have heard the famous phrase, jousting at windmills or lunging at windmills. So he thought a windmill was an opposing knight, and he gets into a jousting match with the windmill. So he's walking around the countryside, and he happens to have a sidekick with him called Sancho Panza. And Panza means belly.
Right. I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you just zoom in a little bit more on the screen so people can see the text just a bit clearer?
How do I, zoom, yes, you bet. Okay. That better?
Just a little bit more, I think.
Okay, so let's do more zoom. Let's see, how about 20? We'll try that. How's that?
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So he has a sidekick named Sancho Panza, which means Sancho with big belly, and they travel around here to there. In this particular chapter, this relates how the great Sancho took possession of his island and of how he made a beginning in governing. So to come to the point then, Sancho, with all of his attendants, arrived at a village of some 1,000 inhabitants, and one of the largest the Duke possessed. They informed him that it was called the island of Barataria, either because the name of the village was Baratario, or because of the joke by way of which the government had been conferred upon him. All those of you in the audience who know a little Spanish know immediately that Barataria means cheap land, from barato. It's tierra barata. It's just cheap land, like nothing there. You know, like in Seattle, what they call White Center. You know what I mean? So on reaching the gates of the town, which was a walled one, the municipality came forth to meet him. The bells rang out a peal, and the inhabitants showed every sign of general satisfaction. And with great pomp, they conducted him to the principal church to give thanks to God. And then with burlesque ceremonies, they presented him with the keys of the town and acknowledged him as perpetual governor of the island of Barataria. How this happened, nobody knows. There's a short, fat guy who's a sidekick to a slightly insane knight, would-be knight named Quixote, and they walk into town and they make Pancho the governor. Anyhow, the costume, the beard, and the fat, squat figure of the new governor astonished all those who were not in the secret, and even all who were, and they were not a few. Finally, leading him out of the church, they carried him to the judgment seat and seated him on it, and the Duke's mayordomo said to him, "It is an ancient custom in this island, Signor Governor, that he who comes to take possession of this famous island is bound to answer a question which shall be put to him, and which must be a somewhat knotty and difficult one. And by his answer, the people take the measure of their new governor's wit and hail with joy or deplore his arrival accordingly." So one of the questions was for him to judge a case. So he says, let the mayordomo go on with his question, and I'll give the best answer I can, whether the people deplore or not. The mayordomo, and that means someone who's like in charge of an estate, like the manager or the head butler or something like that. He's a steward of a large household or estate. Before he could ask this question that they ask of every governor, lo and behold, two old men come into court and they have a litigation against each other. And now Sancho's going to be the judge. At this instant, there came into the court two old men, one carrying a cane by way of a walking stick, and the one who had no stick said, "Señor, some time ago I lent this good man 10 gold crowns in gold to gratify him and do him a service, por hacerle placer y buena obra, on the condition that he was to return them to me whenever I should ask for them. A long time passed before I asked for them, for I would not put him to any greater straits to return them than he was in when I lent them to him. But thinking he was growing careless about payment, I asked for them once and several times. And not only will he not give them back, but he denies that he owes them. And he says I never lent him any such crowns, or if I did, that he repaid them. And I have no witnesses either of the loan or the payment, for he never paid me. I want your worship to put him to his oath. And if he swears he returned them to me, I forgive him the debt here and before God." So that's the plaintiff, similar as what we read in the Hebrew version. "What say you to this, good old man, you with the stick?" said Sancho. So in Cervantes' version, the old man with the stick is already there. In the Talmudic version, we hear, first we don't know that, and then we hear that he went and brought the cane. So he must have been summoned back to court to take the oath. But in the Cervantes version, he's just already there with the cane. "I admit, Signor, that he lent them to me, but let your worship lower your staff, and as he leaves it to my oath, I'll swear that I gave them back." And he uses the words los he vuelto and paid pagado him really and truly. So he's going to swear two things: that he returned them physically, that's the los he vuelto, and then legally he paid him, which would mean you would notify somebody that you're paying. So there's two verbs in Spanish Cervantes uses to coalesce in the singular meaning, you might remember, of pagar, because in Aramaic, this means both. This means voltar and pagar. That's the secret to the con that the stick-bearing old man borrower plays in the Jewish court. Here, Cervantes has him swearing both things because that's what pagar would mean. The governor lowered the staff, and as he did so, the old man who had the stick handed it to the other old man to hold for him while he swore, as if he found it in his way, and then laid his hand on the cross of the staff, saying that it was true, the 10 crowns that were demanded of him had been lent to him, but that he had with his own hand given them back into the hand of the other, pero que él se los había vuelto de su mano a la suya, that he had returned them to his hand, from the hand, this is the su mano of the borrower, a la suya, to the lender. That's what he's saying, and that he, not recollecting it, the lender, was always asking for them. So now we have something strange, which is not in the Talmudic version. The governor lowers a staff, and on the end of the staff, there was a cross. And then you see here, and then laid his hand on the cross of the staff. And the borrower, who has to take the oath that he doesn't owe anything to the lender, has to touch the cross, and that's kind of how he takes the oath. This is totally new. We don't see this in the Talmudic version. Next, there's no Sefer Torah. And the borrower, when he swears, he doesn't hold anything at all. He just touches the staff with the cross on the end of it. So why does he need to let go of his cane in order to do that? In the Talmudic version, the borrower has to take a Sefer Torah, so he can't hold the cane. In the Cervantes version, he can hold the cane all he wants. All he's doing is reaching up with one hand to touch the cross. Seeing this, the great governor asked the creditor what answer he had to make to what his opponent said. So now Sancho Panza, the governor of Barataria, asks the lender. He said that no doubt his debtor had told the truth, for he believed him to be an honest man and a good Christian, and he himself must have forgotten when and how he had given him back the crowns. And from that time forth, he would make no further demand upon him. So the old man, the borrower, more or less, the lender is more or less giving up. He says, if I heard the oath from the borrower and I know that he's honest and a good Christian, I have to take his word for it. We're going to see in a moment, these are all loaded terms by our friend Miguel de Cervantes. The debtor took his stick again, so he takes back the stick and we all know, note to audience, we know that he had given the stick to the lender, and inside it were the coins. Now he got it back. So he was able to swear during the time of the oath. He could swear truthfully, although not the way we would understand the words, that he actually had to replace the money back in his hand using the verb voltar, right? And also, you notice, I know one more thing. Before he takes the oath, the old man says, I will swear two things, los he vuelto y los pagado. Two things, paying in the normal sense and vuelto in the replacing an object in the hand sense. But when he actually takes the oath, does he say one word about pagar? Nope. He says, pero que él se los había vuelto de su mano a la suya, totally ignoring pagar, only using the word voltar. Now there's a kind of a con in there, right? And the old man, the lender, doesn't catch it. He says, oh, well, this guy, we know him. He's got honra, as you would say in 16th century Spain. He's a good Christian. And so he must be telling the truth. Now, the debtor takes the stick again and bowing his head left the court. So he's got his money. He swore truthfully and then he took back the money. Observing this and how, without another word, he made off, and observing too the resignation of the plaintiff, Sancho buried his head in his bosom and remained for a short space in deep thought, with the forefinger of his right hand on his brow and nose. Then he raised his head and bade them call back the old man with the stick, for he had already taken his departure. Of course, he got the heck out of Dodge. They brought him back, and as soon as Sancho saw him, he said, "Honest man, give me that stick, for I want it." "Willingly," said the old man. "Here it is, senor." And he put it into his hand. Means the old man, the borrower, put it in the hand of Sancho Panza, the Cervantes sidekick. Sancho took it and handing it to the other old man, said to him, "Go and God be with you, for now you are paid." "Ay, senor," returned the old man, the lender. "Why? Is this cane worth 10 gold crowns?" "Yes," said the governor, "or if not, I am the greatest dolt in the world. Now you will see whether I have got the headpiece to govern a whole kingdom." And he ordered the cane to be broken in two. There, in the presence of all, it was done, and in the middle of it they found 10 gold crowns. All were filled with amazement and looked upon their governor as another Solomon. They asked him how he had come to the conclusion that the 10 crowns were in the cane. He replied that observing how the old man who swore gave the stick to his opponent while he was taking the oath, and swore that he had really and truly given him the crowns, and also in Spanish using the word voltar only, but not pagar, and how as soon as he had done swearing, he asked for the stick again, it came into his head that the sum demanded must be inside it. And from this, he said, it might be seen that God sometimes guides those who govern in their judgments, even though they may be fools. Besides, he had himself heard the curate of his village, curate means priest, it's an old word for priest, of his village mention just such another case, and he had so good a memory that if it was not that he forgot everything he wished to remember, there would not be such a memory in all the island. To conclude, the old men went off, one crestfallen and the other in high contentment. All who were present were astonished, and he who was recording the words, deeds, and movements of Sancho could not make up his mind whether he was to look upon him and set him down as a fool or as a man of sense. Okay, now let's just read a little bit of the story in Spanish. So, by the way, in the beginning of this chapter, which I didn't read, there's a little introduction, and this is by the author, and he says, "To thee I appeal to help me enlighten the darkness of my wit, that I may be able to proceed with scrupulous exactitude in giving an account of the great Sancho Panza's government." So who's speaking here is the author, Cervantes. "For without thee," and he's talking to the muses, "I feel myself weak, feeble, and uncertain." How does he say this in Spanish? Mira. He says, "Que sin ti," without you, "yo me siento tibio," weak, "desmazalado y confuso." So desmazalado is pure Hebrew, Spanishified, right? It means feeble, but it means without luck. Like we would say, you know how you say desmazalado in Turkish? Anybody? Ugursuz. Ever heard gursuz? It's really Turkish ugursuz. It means without any luck. That's desmazalado. I'm not certain a goy would use the word, even if he heard it. I'm not sure a goy in Spain in the 16th century would write that word. So there's one hint for you. Now, this is the story. Okay, so ante el cual. Now we said in English they both have staffs, but here's something interesting. Ante el cual se presentaron. This is before the mayordomo had a chance to ask Sancho Panza the question, which is customary for on the first day of rule of a new governor. Ante el cual, before that, se presentaron dos hombres ancianos. Two old men presented themselves. El uno traía una cañaella por báculo, y el sin báculo dijo. So one of them was holding a cane, and maybe this refers to the wood. He was holding like a cane as a báculo, y el sin báculo dijo. Now, instead of the word, for the word cane or stick, he says báculo. That is a strange word in the 16th century in Spain. It comes from the Roman, the Latin baculum, but you would normally say vara. Even in the old Ladino of the Hadgadia, when there's came a stick and beats the dog, it's la vara. Y vino la vara, right? Y armó el perro. Nobody uses báculo, even in the 16th century. So what's going on there? And also, now here's the speeches of the lender and the borrower. This is what the borrower says. A lo que dijo el viejo. So the borrower says, Yo, señor, confieso que me los prestó. You, Lord, talking to Sancho Panza, the governor. I admit, I confess that he lent them to me. Y baje vuestra merced esta vara. And may your grace please lower this stick. So you see, the governor has a vara, but the two old men have báculos. Something going on here. Y pues él lo deja en mi juramento, and then let him leave me in my oath. Yo juraré, I will swear, como se los he vuelto y pagado real y verdaderamente. So he's going to say two things. I placed them in his hand, I replaced them, and I paid him. Fine. That's what he promises to swear. But when the time comes to swear, he doesn't say that. Look what he says. Bajó el gobernador la vara. So the governor has a stick. Interesting. What religion is the governor? Sancho Panza. Well, we're going to see in a moment. He was an old Christian. What religion is Don Quixote? It's vague. It's vague what he was. Very well could have been a new Christian, which means a converso. So the governor lowers the vara. Y en tanto el viejo del báculo dio el báculo al otro viejo. And then the old man with the cane gave the cane to the other man. So the borrower who's about to swear gives the cane to the other old man, the lender. Que se le tuviese en tanto que juraba. And he wanted him to hold it, that he should hold it, while the borrower is swearing. Como si le embarazara mucho, because holding the cane made the borrower who's about to swear embarrassed. Why would you be embarrassed to hold a cane? Y luego puso la mano en la cruz de la vara, and then the borrower, old man, puts his hand on the cross of the vara being held by the governor, diciendo, saying, que era verdad, it's true, que se le habían prestado aquellos 10 escudos, that he had lent him the 10 escudos que se le pedían, that he's demanding. Pero, however, que él se los había vuelto de su mano a la suya. But he, the borrower, had returned them, had replaced them. That's what this means. From his hand, I mean, Mr. Borrower, with the old man with the cane, a la suya, to his hand, meaning the old man, the lender who brought him to court. It doesn't say one word about pagar. See that? Y que por no caer en ello, se los volvía a pedir por momentos. Okay, fine. Now let's see. The rest of the story. Oh. Okay, no, that's fine. So now you know the story, you know both things. There's two details that are different between Cervantes version and the Talmudic version. To hint that we are dealing with a special kind of staff, possibly with Hebrew undertones, Cervantes used the term baculo from the Latin baculum of the Vulgate. The Vulgate is, you know, the Targum. So the Goyim, the Catholics, have a Targum of the entire Bible called the Vulgata. Vulgata means the Hamon Am, the common people, like vulgar. So the Vulgata is a translation of the Torah or the Mikra, the entire Bible, into Latin. And it's a Latin which isn't a fancy Latin, but it's a easily understood Latin if you lived in the Roman Empire at the time, rather than a more common term, vara. You see that Sancho lowers a vara, but the two old men, well, one of them is holding a báculo. Casually, he mentions that both parties were old. This detail permits the audience to believe that payment may have escaped the creditor's memory. By assuming that the defendant was too infirm, the reader is led to believe that that was the reason he needed a walking rod. Primarily, the Hebrew root peresh ayin, from where the term depareh stems, means to leave, to abandon. So you may remember in the story of the golden calf, there's a pasuk that says, Ki fera'o Aharon, that the mob got rowdy and demanded a golden calf and started dancing around it and doing whatever you do to a golden calf in 1300 BC, which I personally would not know. And the pasuk says, how did this happen? Ki pera'o Aharon, because Aharon abandoned the nation. He just let them do whatever the heck they wanted. That's the same root. Means to leave. He left them alone. Like he didn't watch them. He didn't discipline them. He didn't control them. He just left them do whatever they wanted. Accordingly, the idiomatic sense of leaving money in the hand of the creditor is to requite, to replace, or Spanish volver, as proposed by Cervantes, rather than to pay, which would be pagar, as understood by the commentators to the Talmudic version. Since the Spanish pagado cannot be subjected to the semantic manipulations of par'e, Cervantes makes the debtor say, but he doesn't do it, that he will also swear that I paid him pagado back really and truly. And that's where he says here, como se los he vuelto y pagado real y verdaderamente. That's like, you even hear people speak this way in Madrid today, that flourish, like really and truly, right? Okay, but it's a con because he never delivers what he claimed he would deliver in the famous fancy speech. However, at the time of the oath, the master conniver skips the incriminating words and says that he had returned them from his own hand to his, but not that he had pagado the loan. The staff. In Cervantes' account, instead of a Torah, the deponent, means the borrower who's swearing, who's taking an oath, touches the cross at the head of the governor's staff. Casually, Cervantes remarks that the accused handed over the reed while he took the oath as if he was embarrassed by it. Why should this be embarrassing? So now, there is an older version of the Talmud so this is a book called Osar HaGeonim. I don't know if you've heard of it. So there was a professor named B.M. Levine, or Levin in English. He lived in Israel around the 1920s. He made it his mission to collect all the Geonic statements. Usually he got from secondary sources. People quoted the Geonim in the Middle Ages, and he organized them according to the sequence they appear in the Talmud. And this is the one on Nedarim. And look what he says, it's very interesting. I'll read it in Hebrew, and then I'll read it in English. So, that's the name of a text. So he found a book called, a funny book, Basar al Gabe Gehalim, meat on top of coals. So it's talking about roasting, you know. Garis has the following version: Kanya de shoshelita beraba, shalshelet shehakuk baha shem hameforash, de kolman de mishteba leshikra lahava maseh mamte. וכי משתבע הגברה לבעל דיני, אמר לה, תא הזה דאשתבע בקושתה. אזל אמתה יזה ברשע דשושליתה, רגז האח ותברא, להוא קניה ואשתה פוך. So here it is in English. I've translated it here. There's an older account of the Talmud preserved in quotations from early sources. You can find it in the book by Besalel Ashkenazi, Shita Mekubeset, Nedarim 25a. This is Nedarim 25a in Osar HaGeonim. According to this account, the oath by the borrower was pronounced not while holding the scroll of the Torah, but while touching a chain on which the holy name, that's the tetragrammaton, which is Yod He Vav He, right? We know that is the Shem HaMeforash, the God's name, was engraved. It was believed that whoever would swear falsely would not be able to stretch his hand and touch the head of the chain. So there's a little rod that Rava had in court, and there's a gold chain at the end of the rod, and at the end of the gold chain are the letters Yod He Vav He. So now to touch that while you're lying, most people would not have the audacity to do that, right? So when that man, the debtor, was about to swear to the plaintiff, he told him, "Come, I will show you that I'm swearing the truth." Then he went and stretched his hand and touched the head of the chain by thereby touching God's name. In anger, the other broke the reed and the money fell down. Okay, the chain Rabbah has is called shoshelita right here. there a problem with that word? Yes, you'll see in a moment. It follows that the story was dealing with an extrajudicial oath taken in a judicial proceeding without requirement of the law. As I said at the beginning of this class, we also went through it last time, by biblical law, if you deny all of the claim against you, that's called kofer bakol, denies everything, you don't have to take an oath, and you don't hold the Sefer Torah. This is why the above mentioned formula for warning the deponent was not recited. Okay, and also in this story, last week, I didn't go into it now, but last week, the Talmud says, why do we have this disclaimer that we announce to people who take oaths that you're swearing not according to your mind, how you interpret the words, but how we interpret the words? Why do you have to say that? Because to stop trickers like this old man with the staff. But in the give and take between these two old men, you would never make that disclaimer anyway, because it's not a biblically required oath. So fine. This account coincides with Cervantes in an essential point. The accused volunteers to take the oath because he doesn't have to. In both accounts, the defendant touches the head of a venerated object. Accordingly, the reason that the deponent handed over the reed to the plaintiff was not to hold the scroll of the Torah as in the standard text of the Talmud, but to show deference for the sacred object. Now, why is that? In rabbinic etiquette, holding a cane, a kanyo, is regarded as mundane and implies lack of reverence, exactly as explained by Cervantes, as if he was embarrassed by it, como si lo embarazara mucho, in the sense of respect and humility. How do I know that in Jewish thinking or rabbinic etiquette, you don't carry cane, that a cane is something like mundane? Because there's a special law that a man, lo ikanes lehar habayit, you cannot enter the Temple Mount, b'makelo, with your staff, b'min'alo, with your shoes, u'b'afundato, and wearing only a t-shirt or a tank top, u'be'ebek she'al raglav, or with dust that's on your feet. So what would they do? They would have wash stations at the foot of the Har Habayit where you washed your feet. Sound familiar? Ever seen a mosque? Before they go to pray in the mosque, they also wash their feet. Guess where they got it? Right here. Okay? You can't make the Temple Mount a shortcut. It means if you're going from the Mount of Olives to where the Kotel is today, and you want to cut through, that's vergüenza. You can't do that because it's a Temple Mount. You're not supposed to use it for mundane purposes. Another story is, you may have heard of this. This is Rosh Hashanah, second chapter. You may have heard there was a famous fight between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. They had several fights, and it resulted in the end of Rabban Gamliel being expelled from the Bet HaMidrash. But leading up to it, let's see. So Rabbi Yehoshua was a master of astronomy, and he knew it better than Rabban Gamliel. And one year, lo and behold, Rabban Gamliel and his court, they declared Rosh Chodesh on the wrong day, and so they were off by a day or so, which means Yom Kippur was off by a day or so. Rabbi Yehoshua protested. And Rabban Gamliel said, well, it's not what you think it is, even if you're more right than me. It's what our court says it is. The Jewish court controls the calendar, even if we're wrong. That's the law, by the way. So he said, I order you to come to see me on the day you think is Yom Kippur with your staff and with your money in your hand. And so I want you to show in your actions that it's a normal day. So he did. But this whole story shows you that to walk around with your cane and your money in your hand is something you would not do in the Temple Mount, not do in a holy place. It's a very mundane thing to do. Okay, now, naturally, Cervantes transformed a Jewish sacred object, which is the actual shoshelita, the golden chain, into a cross. The change may not have been totally arbitrary. In the Jewish text, the chain is designated shoshelita, which means chain, like shalshelet, but it also has the three of its four letters are like shalosh, right? Shoshelita sounds like shelosha. In a Catholic environment, what would the word three mean? Jews holding Christological ideologies, and there were plenty of these among the conversos, probably read it as sheloshita, not shoshelita, but sheloshita, as if referring to the Christian Trinity. Probably this was the reason for suppressing the early account in the Talmud and substituting it with a version that, although legally confusing, was theologically less problematic. So what he's trying to say is, and what we're seeing here is that the editors of the Talmud that we got our text from, which is faulty, where you might call pious hands, who are trying to cover up or prevent anybody from reading a Jewish text in a Christological way. Where did they develop that fear? In Christian Spain, obviously. But we don't want to pay the price for that fear, or whether or not the fear was righteously motivated. We don't want to pay the price by ruining the text of the Talmud, right? That's the problem. We are now in a position to ask a most fundamental question. What moved Cervantes to choose this particular story from the Talmud? To answer this question and bring out the concrete meaning of the story, a few more points must be examined. After the debtor swore, Sancho asked the creditor if he was satisfied with the oath. Without hesitation, he replied, this is the old man, the plaintiff, he replied that he believed that the debtor was speaking the truth, as he knew him to be a worthy man and a good Christian, hombre de bien y buen cristiano. The exchange seems superfluous. Obviously, it has no counterpart in the Talmudic version. In fact, as we shall see in the course of our examination, it is a detail of the highest importance, essential for the proper decoding of the story. In an address made by King Ferdinand to new Christians on September 6, 1493, notice a little bit after the next year following the expulsion, he called on them to associate with Christian Catholics, i.e. Cristianos viejos, to learn how to be faithful and Christian Catholics. Now, in what must be described as a monstrous and hideous request, the monarch then called on newly converted parents not to raise their own children. Rather, they should entrust their offspring to Christian Catholics, i.e. people not tainted with Jewish blood, in order to be taught and be indoctrinated by them, by the Christian Catholics. In other words, you need your kids to assimilate to your new religion. That's the only way to remove this mancha, this stain of Jewishness. This address had been the focus of the Lazarillo de Tormes, a work written with a fantastical sense of humor. In a series of interlinked sketches, the author exposes in moving detail and ice-cold wit the knavery and debauchery characteristic of these paragons of virtue, thus providing a powerful portrait of the moral agony and degradation suffered by Lazarillo, a new Christian who decided to heed the call of the king and associate with worthies. That's what that book is about. Prove de Lazarillo, he tries to do what everybody says, and all they do is screw him, the whole book. In our story, Cervantes makes sure to point out to the privileged reader that the villain, the borrower, is a Cristiano Viejo, or as they prefer to be known, worthy man and a good Christian, hombre de bien y buen cristiano. By inference, we know who the designated victim is, the old man lender, that is a converso. Thus, the story exposes with visceral impact the self-indulgent moralism of those parading as good Christians. Like the author of Lazarillo de Tormes, Cervantes too wants to expose the cynicism and corruption of those supposing to teach and indoctrinate the unworthy neophytes with tainted blood, the Jews, in other words. The cheat is a Cristiano Viejo. Cristiano Viejos were notorious for their insatiable greed and the desire to gain wealth by pillaging the fruits of other lower human beings. That's a typo right there. Characteristically, this paragon of Christian virtue does not hesitate to defraud someone who, out of the goodness of his heart, lent him money to make him happy and as a good deed. Okay, I'll skip this. Cleverly manipulating the semantic fields of his oath and promises, the Cristiano Viejo could never be formally charged with perjury. It is true that at the end of our story, justice is done, but this can take place only in the mythical island of Barataria, where Don Quixote's companion rules, not in the real Spain. We can now suggest a reason why Cervantes chose baculo for staff from the Latin baculum, rather than the more common term of vara, which is exactly the term he uses for the staff that Sancho lowers, which has the cross. It is the term used by the Vulgate, the Vulgata, to designate the walking staff of the patriarchs when they translate Makel of Abraham or even Moshe Rabbeinu, etc. They use the word bakulo, like the typical mean mentioned earlier. I didn't put that part in this paper. The creditor holds symbols of the Hebrew scripture to succor his victims. So the guy who's holding the cane, the caño, he presents it as a bakulo, means he's showing off as if he's superior, or he inherited the values of the Hebrew scripture, etc. A final point. At the end of the story, the Talmud says that upon realizing that the money was contained in the reed, it was discovered that technically he, the borrower, had swore the truth. Let me show you that here. No. I'll go back to the text of the Talmud. Here we go. Hahum alver rachaz, the lender got very angry. V'tabre, and he broke, smashed, le'ahu kanya, to the kanyu. V'ishtepach hanuhu zuzeh le'ar'a, and the golden coins hidden in the kanyu, they fell on the ground. V'ishtekach de'koshta ishteba, and it turned out that he swore, this old man, the borrower, he swore bikoshta, in truth. But is there a distinction? Is there a nuance in the word koshta? Because Don Quixote's book isn't called Don Costa, it's called Don Quixote or Quixote. What's anything there? Yes, there is. A final point. At the end of the story, the Talmud says that upon realizing that the money was contained in the reed, it was discovered that technically he, the deponent, had sworn the truth. The term used for the truth is bekushta, a variant pattern form of Don Quixote, Cervantes' hero. However, a lexical note could help us decode the message. Whereas Quixote is mainly used in the sense of straightness, truth, the form bekushta is used as an affirmative, designed to ascertain the validity of a statement. Have you ever heard people who say, honest, I'm honestly telling you, I mean honest. When you say it in that way, we suspect you're not so honest. Put more simply, Quixote designates the real truth, whereas kushta designates the evident or conventional truth, something that occasionally, as in our story, could be a patent lie. Properly decoded, our story is a story of desperation, a muzzled cry, a frightening allegory disclosing the dark undercurrents dominating real Spain if you're in the unfortunate position of being a nuevo cristiano with Jewish blood, forced to negotiate a country in which all your brethren have been expelled from, and you're kind of left there alone and having some kind of difficulty. That's really the many themes in Don Quixote are of this type. But my point here was to show that with all this, he was able to marshal a knowledge of the actual text of the Talmud that the Jews lost. They lost for whatever reasons. Maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. You're worried that people will read it in a Christological way. It sounds like three, so you erase that part and you insert a Sefer Torah in its place, which doesn't make sense at all according to Jewish law, but we pay the price. And thank God so the Jewish tradition of the Sephardim, in my opinion, is found in Sephardic authors who did remain Jewish, but it's also found in many places in the most surprising corners of the earth in the literary output left by the conversos. There were hundreds of thousands of them, and they're the ones who are known, the people who wrote are the most famous authors known as the Golden Age of Spain. So I'm done. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you very much. I know there's a lot of detail in Spanish, Aramaic, Hebrew, and English, but I hope you all enjoyed it. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Rabbi. If anybody has any questions, you can feel free to unmute one at a time, of course, because we don't want to go crazy, or type them in the chat. I see Rochelle. I think, Rochelle, do you have a question?
Yes. Oh, here, I didn't realize my video was off. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you. This was very interesting.
Oh, good.
I wanted to ask you about the meaning of the word embarazar. or embarrassed.
Yes.
Or no, you translated it as embarrassed.
Yes.
In my Ladino,
Yes.
embarazar is more like it bothered me, not me embarazó mucho que me dijiste esto.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yes.
Why
Yes.
am I not?
Yes, embarazar, I think is a cognative English embarrass, which is why I used it, but I think you're right. It's closer to being bothered. It's like a little offensive. And that would be exactly how you would feel if you showed up in the temple or in a synagogue carrying a caño. It's like vergüenza.
Right.
It's like you don't do that.
Of course,
right?
Of course, in modern Spanish, it also means to be pregnant.
Pregnant, I know.
But it's interesting that in Cervantes's time, it didn't mean that at all.
No.
Yeah, so we have the real meaning of the word.
You do, absolutely. Well, he's from the 15th century, 16th century, and so are we. So.
Right. Yeah.
Very good.
Thank
you.
Good point. Fascinating. Yeah.
I want to say thank you so much. I always read in Spanish. Was my major.
Yes.
And I always wanted to get more into religion, which I did. I became religious. But I never realized that my Spanish, when I studied Cervantes, I actually was learning Talmud.
Yes.
So now I thank you for bridging those two.
Oh, you'd be surprised how much Talmud and Jewish content is in Cervantes. You'd be surprised.
Yes, I studied Spanish too. I was a teacher, Spanish teacher, and I studied Don Quixote, not Quixote, in depth. And they never, ever made any reference to the Talmud. And the teacher was a Sephardic Jew.
Yeah.
These kind of things, you really have to know the Talmud to recognize it, because as you know, he presents the story that doesn't match the printed text of the Talmud. So you really have to know something's off when you read the current Aramaic version, and you have to scratch your head and say, este cuál es, bre? And then you go searching and you find this kind of old manuscript, secondary source, and now I get it. But that's hard to do. You have to.
Where did we get the idea that Cervantes was Jewish? That I never heard that either.
From this and from many other portrayals of he portrayed. I mean, I don't know if he was. I don't think he was practicing Jewish, but I think he was a descendant of conversos.
Wow.
Suffered for. So he applied to immigrate to the New World, and they denied him. And it appears the reason they denied many conversos, they didn't want any Jewish blood in the New World. Now they got they missed a few things. This guy Bartolomeo de las Casas, he's a venerated hero in Mexico. He criticized the conquistadores for being so ruthless. He was a converso too. They didn't figure that out, so they let him slip through.
And my own Spanish also, embarazada means pregnant.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So there's no connection between the two meanings.
No, I don't think so. No. Middle Ages, no.
This was excellent. Thank you so much.
Yes. When I was in Brooklyn College, they never mentioned the Inquisition or things like that.
Never.
In the golden age of Spain, I remember.
So many of them were Jewish. Many of them. The author of Las Reformas, the author of La Lozana Andaluza, just Gongorio.
Descendants of
Jews. Yeah. The famous poet Quevedo, a lot of them. The vast majority of them.
What about Lope de Vega?
Lope de Vega,
where was he?
He was old Christian. He used to make fun. Remember, he used to make fun of someone named Fray Luis de Góngora. So he used to call him Gongorillo, and he would say, "Gongorillo, I'm going to smother my words with lard, so you won't be able to touch them." So that was a clear swipe that everybody got it, that Góngora is a descendant of conversos.
Don't forget about Christopher Columbus.
I don't. I know. I think he was
first Jew in the New World.
100% Judeo. 100%. Okay. I think we're over the time. So Chodesh Tov U'Mborach, and thank you very much for your kind attention and your kind words, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Hazak Baruch, as always. Chodesh Alegre, Chodesh Tov to everyone. And God willing, hopefully see you. Do we have a program next week, Rabbi, on the topic Maimonides, or do you want to wait?
Let's wait.
Got it. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us for this wonderful two-part series. Rabbi Hazak Baruch, thank you so much. And Nochada Buena, everyone.
Nochada Buena, alegrías. Bye-bye.